Man gets stranded on a desert island. After many, many years, he is finally rescued, and he welcomes his rescuers onto the island to see how he has made a life out of these many years. And he shows them how he has managed to have water and food and shelter. And finally, the captain of the rescuing boat says, I see you've shown us this amazing survival that you have here, and you just haven't shown us those 2 buildings up on the hill. Tell me about those 2 buildings. And he goes, oh, those are my synagogues. And the captain says, 2 synagogues? You're one person who's been stranded here alone on this desert island. Why do you need 2 synagogues? And the man says, well, that synagogue over there on the left, that's the synagogue I attend. And the captain says, the other synagogue? He goes, that place, I wouldn't step foot in it if my life depended on it. New joke. Okay. A guy comes up to a Jewish person who is bemoaning the difficulties and ills of life, and he punches the Jewish person in the arm and says, that's for the Titanic. He says, Titanic? The Titanic was sunk by an iceberg. And the anti-Semite says, iceberg, Goldberg, Greenberg, you're all the same to me. New joke. Another stranded island. This time it's a couple gets stranded on a desert island. Their cruise ship sinks and they manage to make their way and have made their life and or trying to. And the one person in the couple says, oh my gosh, we're going to have to make a whole life here. We're never going to live. It's going to be terrible. I miss my children and my grandchildren. And the other person leans back, sits on the beach and says, no problem, we'll be rescued in no time. She says, how could you know that? We're going to be stranded here for many, many years if we even survive. He says, don't worry. Before we left on our cruise, I made my pledge to the Jewish Federation, but I didn't get around to paying it. They'll find us. Next joke. Man caught in a flood. Floodwaters are rising, and he says, don't worry, God will provide. And his people around him are evacuating, and finally they send a jeep that can go in the waters up to the almost all the way up to the tires on the jeep, and they say, and the National Guard says, come on in, you gotta be saved, you gotta evacuate. And he says, don't worry, God will provide. I have faith. Waters rise even farther. Now it's a boat that they send down the street, and they say, get into the boat, you gotta evacuate. Don't worry, God will survive. God will provide. I'm fine. You go along, save other people less faithful than I. Meanwhile, the waters rise even more. The helicopter comes. They says, grab the ladder. We're going to save you. The waters are rising. God will provide. I believe. Well, the man goes to heaven. God did not provide, and he's a little ticked off. And God says, what happens? And so sorry you died. And to God, I believed. I was the only one who believed. Everyone else evacuated. And God says, what more did you want from me? I sent you a jeep. I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. I just told several jokes here. I mentioned in an earlier podcast that whenever I tell a joke like this, it's like throwing a ball over a fence and not knowing if there's anyone there on the other side to catch up. So I hope you were chuckling. It kind of felt like one of these, like, is this thing on? Is this thing on? But I wanted to do an episode of Center of Gravity on humor. Why is this part of our mission? Because humor is the thing that, except on the most ideological driven extremes, humor is the thing that centralizes us, that brings us together, that brings us to a place of commonality, that sheds light on truths that when we go into our polarized ideological extremes, sometimes it's hard for us to see. And as we approach the festival of Purim, and you can see, in addition to all of my books that are typically the background here, now I put past Purim costumes up here. As we head, not this year's Purim costume, that's a surprise. As we head into Purim, I wanted to think about humor. Because jokes, humor, give us a sense of truth. Sometimes it's a biting, hard to swallow truth. sometimes, especially if we're not able to see the flip side of things, as we most well can see from the center, sometimes it's a hard truth to swallow. What are those jokes that I told you? The one about I wouldn't step foot if my life depended on the desert isle? We feel strongly about our communities, and sometimes we define ourselves and our communities in the negative, in relief against another community, against another synagogue. What does it tell us? Anti-Semitism is real. That's the Goldberg iceberg Greenberg joke. And Jews are painted often with an unfair, broad brush. What is the Stranded on a Desert Island, the Jewish Federation joke? We raise money for a lot of good causes. And sometimes the association of Jews with money has been misused in a way that we have to laugh at. How aggressive we are, how engaging we are at raising money for good causes. And what about I sent you a Jeep, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter? Is that it is the Jewish way not to believe in sitting passively or fatalistically, but we do something about our situation. We seek to improve our situation, and we take the help that we can get. So these are some examples. Sometimes jokes come not as a delivered punchline, but because life is funny. This is the Seinfeld genre, right? Jokes are just calling out our quirks. They're just stories that we recognize and tell in a way that allows us to laugh at ourselves and laugh at our circumstances. I'll tell you, the longest laugh I ever got in a high holiday sermon was I still relish this moment. This joke was I told a story about the Israeli author Edgar Keret. Edgar Keret tells the story of how he met his wife. He was coming out of a club and he happened to run into someone that he knew only very peripherally, very tangentially. And it was raining and he had decided to go home early. And as he tells the story, he saw this woman and she said, "Kiss me now. Kiss me." And he said, well, maybe I'll make it a slightly longer night than I intended. And they went back in, had a wonderful night, and that began the relationship that became his marital relationship, his marriage. Months later, he told this story. Months later, he tells this story to another couple. They're out to dinner, and he says, well, we met, or really re-met, when it was raining, and I was going out, and I was leaving the club, and she came in, and she said, "Kiss me." And his now wife turns to him and says, "Edgar, I didn't say kiss me. I said taxi. In all this rain, it's going to be hard to get a taxi." And he says, well, it worked anyway. That's a cute story. That gets maybe a chuckle at best. But what I then turned to the congregation is I told my personal story. And sometimes the personal is what brings you close. I said, I had a similar experience when I met my wife, Deva. I told her I was studying in rabbinical school. Months later, she admitted to me she thought I had said medical school. Now, maybe the delivery in a one-person room here, because laughter is infectious and contagious and it builds on itself. Maybe that doesn't work for you, but I'm telling you, I had to wait a full 30 seconds for the congregation to die down and then talk about Jewish identity and the stories that we tell. The reason I had told that joke, the reason I tell any jokes, is that humor is a tool. Just like a good personal story, or just like props or a costume or music or anything else. It's a way of drawing people in. Sometimes I have had the experience where the humor is so effective that it's maybe too effective. People don't remember the sermon or the teaching. They just remember the starting joke. I don't love that. I want humor to be a means to a broader end of a lesson, of a way to reflect. Sometimes humor is a dangerous tool. It's a dangerous tool in the sense that it is incredibly effective. We've all been both on the inside and outside of an inside joke. And what does an inside joke do? It is in many ways very edgy and dangerous because it defines who's in and who's out. The classic joke, it goes back to the 1950s of that, is a joke that goes basically like this, very short joke. It goes like this. An elephant and a hippo are taking a bath. The hippo says to the elephant, "Pass the soap." And the elephant says, "No soap radio." That joke makes no sense. The only way that joke works is if you have a third person, you have the joke teller, the joke listener, and a third person who cracks up. And what you're doing in that moment is you're saying, there is a joke that we get. The joke makes no sense. It's ridiculous. There's a joke that we get. And the tension or the edginess of the joke is you're on the outside until, of course, we let you know. And then you're on the inside for the next person. And the joke's on that person. We have jokes that are inside jokes that when we tell them in a certain way, allow people to feel more embraced, more in. This one's not so much a joke, it's maybe something from childhood or a youth group or something like this, but an inside moment or cue is, for example, if I say, Sheket bevakasha, I'm going to do it, you got to say it, Sheket bevakasha. If I have to tell jokes without hearing your response, you have to respond, hey, to that, right? And uh, and people know instinctively to say, hey, at the end there. Humor is effective. Humor is effective as a tool in a way that it lays bare the cynicism of bad leadership in a way that defangs those leaders. Think about the times that you've seen someone, maybe a teacher in a class or a world leader who can't take a joke about themselves, about their mistakes or their foibles, about how something didn't go as planned. And if they can't laugh, they become the joke and somehow they become smaller and minimized. The ability to laugh at oneself is power. And it is threatening to those who can't laugh at themselves. It happens in a regime that is very fragile. It shows the fragility of that regime. But the challenge with power as a tool is that it is a dangerous tool because there is a line. And very quickly, when you cross that line, the topic becomes very cheap. It becomes not funny. It becomes hurtful. It puts people outside the joke as opposed to inside the joke. Finding that line is where the magic of humor is. And it's hard. I can tell you, as someone who has written musical comedies, it is hard to find that line because the funniest jokes are the ones that just toe that line. I once told a joke about an overcrowded cemetery. Doesn't sound funny. My wife was convinced that it was not going to be a funny joke. She was certain it was going to uncomfortably bomb. I am relieved to tell you that what happened in the moment of telling that joke is the infectious nature of laughter took in. It was an edgy joke. And it takes too much time to set up here. I'm not going to do it now. It was an edgy joke. And in the second, which felt like an eternity after that joke, no one laughed. And I'm up there and I'm thinking, oy. And then one or two people chuckled. And then it exploded into a massive, massive, uproarious laugh. And I looked at my wife and she could see the relief on my face that the contagion of the humor, because I had just towed the edge of that line and people looked around and said, is it okay? Is it okay to laugh? And yes, it was okay. And once they gave each other permission, we were all together in a room in a good feel. Humor is a tool in that way to bring people in, to bring people together. It is even a tool in the saddest, most tragic times. Humor can be effective. It can be therapeutic. I will tell you that when I sit with a family in preparation for a funeral, very often, if we do the work that we are trying to do to memorialize that person, to recognize that the life of that person is so much more than the immediate stinging pain of loss, it's also the goodness, the quirkiness of that person's whole life, the individuality, the things that made that person tick, the things that made that person lovable. And if we start talking about that and doing that work of memory, people are going to smile and they're going to tell stories. They're going to make each other laugh. And they're going to tell stories that maybe one person heard from one perspective and another person understood or remembered from another perspective. And they're going to laugh about that. And once they've done that, they're seeing the whole of the person's life and not just the immediacy of loss. And that's when people can wistfully cry because the person and those good feelings are no longer with us physically, but they can smile because they are remembering all the reasons that that loss stings, because the reasons that we love someone are what makes loss so hard. And that love sustains well beyond death. It becomes deep, and it becomes the story, and it makes people smile and laugh, even in the eulogy, in the funeral service itself, that people can smile and chuckle at a memory. Laughter is incredibly powerful in that moment on the personal level. And if we zoom way out on the macro level, that's why Jews, I think, have been so good at comedy and humor for so long. Even before the Jackie Masons and the Jerry Seinfelds and the Larry Davids, even before Tevye, because humor lets us push against the status quo, lets us say that maybe this status quo has not been good for us as Jews. Maybe we've been persecuted. It lets us see the people who have sought to persecute us as absurd. And it reassures us that we will live to laugh at them and ourselves. We will live to laugh another day. Laughter becomes a triumph of life and survival and thriving with and despite any threats. And that's why we're doing this podcast right before Purim, because Purim is the holiday that is most about anti-Semitism. More than any other holiday, it's they tried to kill us. That's Haman. Boo. They didn't. That's what we say, v'nahafochu, that our fates were turned on their heads, that the entire story gets turned on their heads, and actually Mordechai is elevated. They tried to kill us. They didn't. Let's eat. We are commanded to have a Purim Seudah, a Purim feast, preferably with laughter and a Purim spiel in it. Purim, the whole story is absurd. It is bawdy. I tell our teenagers that the story that they learned in preschool about Esther, won't you marry me, and the king who liked to party, and the Haman boo who was a little bit snooty, that is not even 10% of the story. Purim's story is like a vaudeville act. It is bawdy, and it opens real conversations by using humor that are far from some upside-down kiddie fairy tale. Purim opens questions of what it means to have agency over one's own body and to say no. That's Vashti, who has enjoyed a modern-day revival in these times where a woman's agency is something that we should celebrate, and not only celebrate, but insist upon. Purim raises questions of what it means to define someone else, Jews, as so often the case, as an other, as an outsider, as not true Persians. Might have been a claim in any generation, a claim that Jews were too globalized, that a claim that questions of whether we could be real French men and women in the time of Napoleon, or real and patriotic Americans in times when we hear that anti-Semitic dog whistle of dual loyalty. Purim has Haman boo saying, there's a people who are outside of us, who aren't real Persians, whose customs are different, and we should persecute them. So Purim asks us to ask very adult questions of what it means to be in or outside of a community. Purim asks questions of what it means to have power as a woman. That's Esther. Purim asks questions of what it means to have power at all. That's Mordechai. Or maybe not even really power, but influence and status in a country that for a long time welcomes us as loyal servants, but keeps us maybe at arm's length from the real seats of power. Questions of whether we have reliable, assured access, or whether that access is fleeting and we actually are eventually vulnerable. Purim asks us questions because it is the only holiday that is purely diasporic, that does not rely on the existence of an Israel, of a land of Israel. That it asks questions of how that existence, without a connection to Israel, is inherently vulnerable. Even if we're loyal enough to save a king's life in chapter 1 of the Megillah, we can be called an enemy of the state by chapter 3. Purim asks questions about what we do when we are given power, long-term or fleeting, what we do with it. Read chapter 9 of the Megillah. That's not a chapter that we focus on in our preschool program. Purim asks questions that don't feel so light or frivolous as the jokes and costumes and shtick and antics and spiels that typically mark the holiday. And speaking about Purim, the late, great Rabbi, Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, said that Purim insists that we will not be intimidated. We will not be traumatized. We will not be defined by our enemies. We will live with the threats and even laugh at them, because what we can laugh at, we cannot be held captive by. I'll say that again. What we can laugh at, we cannot be held captive by. Rabbi Sacks continues, and that therefore is really what the joy of Purim is all about. It's about surviving, and beyond that, thriving, even as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. That's the power of humor. We see it in Purim, and we see it and we use it as a tool in Judaism to cope and to celebrate and to survive and to thrive every day of the year. I use it as a tool in my rabbinate all the time to reaffirm life, to reaffirm that we will be okay. I'll leave you with this thought. Purim, humor, laughter gives us a reason to move away from the ideologue extremes and back to a place where we can see multiple sides, laugh at the foibles and failures and weaknesses of multiple sides, and use that to affirm life, to affirm our strength, to affirm our survival. Purim, laughter, humor, laughter is about breathing, because you can't laugh without breathing. And when we're breathing, we are alive. We are very much alive. That's what it means to bring laughter into our lives as Jews. From Center of Gravity, I'm Rabbi Eric Yanoff. Thank you for tuning in to Center of Gravity. We are working to make this podcast as engaging and meaningful as we can, and so we need your help. If you have any feedback, questions, comments, thoughts, ideas for future podcasts, or any other ways that we can reach you, please email us at centerofgravity@adathisrael.org. Thanks so much for tuning in. Shalom.